focused heavily on millennials and Gen Z at Banza, not just because we are those things, but that's who the consumers of the future are. What choices are they making? What choices do they want for their children? Those are the consumers of the future. The amount of dollars that they're going to be spending in food is going to increase dramatically. So what are their values? Can you create something that's values aligned with what their actual problems are, what their actual needs are?
Welcome, everybody. I'm Mark Peter Davis, Managing Partner of Interplay Ventures. On this podcast, I interview innovators about their strategies, industries, and decisions. Today, I have Mike Tarullo, COO of Banza. Banza makes pasta, pizza, and mac and cheese from chickpeas. You've probably seen them at your grocery store with their signature orange packaging. They've raised about $30 million and have products in 18,000 stores nationally. Before Banza, Mike helped run Venture for America, the nonprofit Andrew Yang started before he ran for president. As you'll hear during the chat, Mike is clearly an expert on food startups. We dive deep into some of the intricacies of what it takes to build one of these companies. And that's why we named this podcast The Playbook for Starting a Food Company. We get into the nitty-gritty of how the food industry operates and discuss strategies that young companies might want to keep in mind as they get started, including why it's important for small companies to have an all-hands-on-deck approach to sales in the early days, important expenses and unit economics to be aware of and keep tracking, why and when raising mega rounds for food companies might not always be the best strategy, and the importance of conducting research and actually following what the data tells you. We cover much more than that. I hope you enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Spark Digital. Spark Digital is a full-service provider of technology consulting, software design, and development services. They work with companies in the communications, media, and technology industries. If you're interested in learning more, visit sparkdigital.com. Cool. Let's jump in. So just a baseline for everybody. I always like to start with what you're doing currently. You mind telling us a little bit about Banza?
Sure. So Banza is a food company. Our mission is to inspire people to eat more chickpeas and other beans. And that's because of their impact on human health and the environment. Chickpeas are one of the most efficient sources of protein by greenhouse gas emissions and water usage. They're also super good for you. It's not just the old rhyme, but they're high in protein and fiber, lower in carbs, low glycemic, a wonderful food. And so what we do is we turn chickpeas into foods that people already love. Pizza, pasta, mac and cheese, rice. We've been at it for about 6 years. And in that time, we've been the fastest growing pasta company in the country. And, in our view, really brought, healthy everyday staples to tens of millions of people. And again, we kind of think we're just getting started. And there's a long way to go, not just with us, but with all kinds of food companies that are trying to make, healthy products what we go to and select in the grocery store every day.
How did you guys decide to do chickpeas and pasta? How did that combination become the natural starting point for you guys?
Yeah, so you had highlighted, I'd been at Venture for America before. One of the fellows in the program in his first, in our very first class was in Detroit, working at a startup that I had helped him get a job at. And on nights and weekends, kind of like messing around with nutrition and food and things like that. And, he had long held that tech was a way to reach a lot of people. But, I think the more he thought about it, and as we thought about it over time, food is something that, everybody consumes every single day. And it's a wonderful way to have a large impact on a lot of people. And so he, a nutrition junkie, figured if he could make a better pasta at home with his hand crank out of chickpeas than the stuff that he could find in the store that was made out of, all kinds of other, flours and ingredients, then there might be something there. And so it was really just a happy accident where he wanted a better pasta for himself. We all kind of, started trying it in the office and, friends and family. And some retailer, in this case, Meijer in the Midwest, decided to kind of take a chance on us. And we were off to the races.
Okay. So you were helping him at Venture for America, then jumped on as this thing kind of got real.
Yes. I like to say that I moved out of the house and into the garage. So, yes.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. I get the pain is the mother of all invention, right? for figuring out a food you need. Why chickpeas, though? Of all the vegetables out there, why did your co-founder, why did he decide to jump in and use chickpeas versus broccoli or something else? What are the characteristics or properties that make that relevant?
So the number one thing in food is always taste. If you're starting a food company and you can't win on taste and experience, you're not going to have a very successful company, and you're not going to be able to make the change you want to make. And I think we can see that with the way that like Beyond and Impossible have approached, making meat, or that Oatly's approached making milk. Is you have to win on taste first. And so chickpeas are pleasingly starchy and actually quite neutral in flavor, and really versatile. So they're high in protein and fiber and vitamins and minerals and stuff like that. But they also can be tasty and neutral. Lentils are a little bit peppery sometimes, and other vegetables won't necessarily hold together if you try to turn them into pasta. If someone tells you they're serving you cauliflower pasta, it's either mush or a lie. There's only certain foods that'll work for certain applications. So for us, chickpeas was just the best choice, and that's kind of why we've stuck with it. In addition to those, health and environmental reasons.
And is it taste like pasta, or does it taste more like a different thing that's of chickpeas for people listening? When they buy it, is it just get rid of the pasta and use this and it's healthier? Or is it another product, a new thing?
Our goal, and what we tend to find, is if you don't tell someone what it is, they're quite likely not to notice. Now, some people have discerning palates, or they don't serve their pasta with sauce, and then there's a higher chance that they would notice. But we've generally found that the majority of people, people say, "Oh, I tricked my spouse," or "I tricked my kids," and we don't necessarily recommend that. It can be a little bit cruel to trick someone into eating something they didn't expect to. But we do think that when we create alternatives, we want them to replace the thing that you're eating. We want to be your Tuesday night pasta night. Your Thursday night pizza night. Like, we want to fill that role for you. That said, I want to take nothing away from the wonderful pasta and pizza restaurants around this country that, make stuff in-house and stuff like that. No problem with them doing that. Nothing wrong with pasta and pizza. We just think we can make it a little bit more nutritious.
Right. And you guys are currently selling it through retail channels. It's not mainly an online distribution.
Yeah, we are vast majority retail.
Okay. And so, have you guys looked into going to the quick service restaurants, the other chains, and saying, "Hey, swap out your pasta for Banza"?
We actually just launched our pizza crust in a small chain called Oath Pizza, which is sort of our first foot into that world. It's something we had been intending to do a while ago, but of course the pandemic put a serious delay on expansion and change in the food world. But we do think that restaurants, colleges, and universities, corporate cafeterias, K through 12, hopefully someday, if we can get the legislation right, those are all places where we can introduce a healthier, great tasting alternative. And it's allergen friendly also, which is increasingly a consideration for people.
So I know you guys have recently expanded the products. As you mentioned earlier, you've got pizza, mac and cheese, and rice.
Yes.
Which was interesting to see. What's the bigger thinking here about where the product and business goes from this point?
Yeah, we have a bunch of ideas. I think what we've started with is mealtime comfort foods. We find that dinner is like one of the hardest meals for people to figure out what to do with every day, and you need an answer that's quick and that's healthy and that's tasty and that everyone in your family will eat. And that's a very difficult combination. You as a father, I'm sure, know this, that like it can be kind of a wrestling match. And so we're focused on those like mealtime staples, comfort foods that people already love. And we want to make them out of chickpeas. And if there was a more suitable bean or legume, we would use that instead. That said, from there are a lot of different places we can go. We've been, one of the things that we believe is that the principles of the Mediterranean diet are good tenets to live by. We think there are a lot of other foods you can continue to make out of beans and chickpeas. We've got some interesting stuff in the pipeline. And of course, we're moving into different channels as well, like we were just talking about food service. So getting outside the grocery store, and other ways where you could get bean-based foods into your home.
Now that you guys have a few SKUs, have you figured out what products sell best? Do they all work, or is there some lesson you've learned around where people buy replacement foods. I have this theory that some people just want comfort food to be comfort food at some point, right? So
Yeah, absolutely.
where does it fit?
And I think that's, to me, that's like the Tuesday night dinner thing. Like people are gonna eat like indulgent foods and the stuff they love. And I think, what you find is most people are seeking some form of balance, but balance is actually really hard. Balance means like a constant state of tension. And we talk about balance like it's a good thing, but like imagine holding balance and then that just being like your permanent state of living. And that's what most of our relationship with food is like. Like I know I'm like constantly making trade-offs and like counting things. And like I've been doing this for like longer than I can remember. And I think a lot of people, or at least people who are sort of intentional about how they eat, think that way also. So for us, we sort of say, hey, we want to be an easy solve for that, but we're not trying to be the only food you eat. Like we're not Soylent out here. We're not saying replace all your meals with this one thing. We just want to be kind of part of the fabric and a go-to and a reliable staple in your pantry or in your freezer where you say, hey, here's dinner. We were surprised to find that we sell, sure, we sell great in the Whole Foods of the world, and they've been a terrific, terrific partner for us. But there's a wide range of different stores and places where we can do great. We have a great business in Target and Kroger and Walmart as well as, like strong regional grocery stores. So it's really like eating healthy and solving the dinner problem is like a national thing. It's not just a thing that, people in certain areas are thinking about. For a long time, we were surprised that we didn't have as much of a concentration, on the West Coast as you might have expected, that it was like, hey, the Midwest was really strong. Texas was really strong. And so it's been fun to see this be kind of a distributed national shift in how we eat. And we think a lot of that is generational.
How big's your team?
We are 50 on the corporate side and about 90 on the factory side. We own our own manufacturing.
Okay, I'm going to get into all that. One of the reasons I asked that is, I think about 50 plus person company on the corporate side getting distribution to 18,000 stores. For the would-be food entrepreneurs listening, how do you do that? How do you get from a product to getting onto a shelf to getting onto many shelves? What's the method? Are there brokers? What's the brass tacks how for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is probably no single right answer, but our answer is from a team of people, none of whom had worked in food before. Of our first 15 or 20 employees, nobody had done this. And we sort of wore that as a badge of pride. It's that like classic like entrepreneurial outsider thing. You're like, hey, I'm going to do something a way that no one else would have thought to. And sometimes that made it much, much harder on us. But I think on balance, it made it easier. We sort of eschewed like the traditional broker and sales structure. And, just like in any company, your early team should go do a lot of the direct selling themselves. And you're going to do a lot of it through hustle. So we found we would just go out to trade shows and we would just bring the energy. There would be like our entire team, which at the time would have been 5 or 10 or 15 people, just like bouncing up and down, running through the aisles of these trade shows, yelling at buyers for these grocery stores when we would see their name badges an aisle over, running samples up to them. And that sort of scrappy energy will go a really long way. Most people are still afraid to like make the call, do the thing. And the other thing we did is just network our way to people, not even through professional networks, often through cold calling. You can literally sometimes just call a retailer and ask for somebody's contact information and get it. Or you can send them a message on LinkedIn, or you can ask a friend of a friend. And over time, I think we started to shift to getting warm intros instead of just blowing people's spots up wherever they were. But certainly at the very beginning, do not be afraid to just like get your product in front of people and tell them your story and see if they like it.
Is there a trade show in particular you recommend for folks to kind of get started?
Yeah. Natural Products Expo West and East are the best shows for new innovation. There are many others, but those are the ones where we met a lot of people.
Okay. And when you blow someone up, whether you're going through LinkedIn or you're kind of scouting through their receptionist or whatever's going on, do you follow up? What is the move? Do you send a product? Do you call them?
Yeah.
How do you get from cold to yes?
you have to have a chance to both get them to try the product and to tell the story of why you're doing it. And in food, those two things are so linked. It's not just a transaction. They need to understand, because the consumer is going to make an emotional decision in the store about why they're buying the thing. They want to see so much more. Like, retailers want to see like the details of your marketing plan. It's the craziest thing. I'm like, yeah, like if people are buying this, why do you need to know that? And it's because they're thinking about your future too. And I've been pretty pleasantly surprised by like how seriously buyers take their jobs. Buyers are the people at the grocery stores who choose what products go on your shelves. How seriously they take their jobs in terms of understanding the brands and the why behind them. I think there's also credit due to people for trying to make purchase decisions that way. So you have to get them to taste it, and you have to get a chance to tell them their story. And that just means relentless follow-up.
And so how do you get them to taste it? You just ship them a product?
It's
in the mail?
If you're at a trade show, you can cook it to them and just like hand it to them. We did that with regular people too. Like, I can't tell you the number of Saturdays that we spent at like ShopRites in New Jersey, just like serving samples. Like that kind of thing is how you get feedback from people, hear what they like and what they don't like, what pitch works best. And you can, if you got a chance with a retailer, you do everything you can to make it successful, including kind of getting out there and investing in them, on feet on the street.
So when you're at a ShopRite in New Jersey giving out samples, did you guys just show up, or do you get permission from the general manager?
No.
How does that work?
Yeah, you get permission.
So you're already on the shelf at that point, right?
That's right.
So you've already gotten the buyer to say yes, and then you called the buyer and said, hey, we want to demo some product.
Yeah, or there's somebody at the organization. It kind of depends on the chain as to how it works. Another thing you can do, just to build a little bit of customer love early, back when we had an office in Detroit, our team would go to Eastern Market, which is, this like big farmers market, and set up there and serve all day and, build some awareness and validation and make enough sales to kind of try to help keep the lights on.
Okay, great. You mentioned there was a traditional way to do the distribution, right? And you guys didn't know it, and that was an advantage because you went direct. Can you explain the traditional method so people are aware of that? What are the channels? What do they cost? Do they work? How does that work?
Yes. So traditionally in food, so it depends on who's doing it. If it's a big company or a small company. If it's a big company, they go to the retailers that they already have the relationships with. And when I say big company, the big food companies in America, General Mills, Hormel, Nestle, Unilever, on and on. They can all basically go to a retailer and say, hey, we'd like you to take this product. And I don't really know what happens in those rooms because I don't get invited into those conversations. But I assume there's a back and forth and some money changes hands and, things just magically appear on shelf. For us, it's not quite like that. You have to kind of prove that you deserve the spot and earn it. One of the ways that people talk about building distribution rapidly is that they bring on a broker who's an intermediary who has a relationship with those retailers and can go right into their offices and talk with them. And those folks can be super helpful for understanding the specific dynamics of those retailers, for understanding what kind of sales pitch is going to work, for helping you get access to data, things like that. But when you're really early, they don't have enough time to pay attention to your tiny little brand that's doing a few $100,000 in revenue. They need to focus on bigger brands that are doing more. And it's just, generally speaking, they can be helpful as you grow. And we work with folks who are terrific now. But in our earliest days, we need to do the selling. It's just like, you can't outsource that selling when you're the CEO or an early executive or an early team member at a small company. You can't just say, we're going to hire a vet and they're going to do it for us. Over time, as you have to build better programs and practices and, invest a certain amount in trade spend and things like that, you need veterans who understand how retail works. But early on, you're kind of better off not thinking about things like slotting fees, which is the amount that you pay to get on shelf. You say, look, if we do that, we're not going to make payroll. And that works for a while. And then eventually it kind of stops working.
What's the inflection point in the company where it makes sense to bring on the brokers?
Boy, it probably varies depending on where you want to get distribution. We found a lot of value in working with big strategic accounts and having brokers on those accounts because they were just so complicated. some of the largest accounts in the country. Those are the ones where there was so much we didn't know, and we could do enough business through them to make it worthwhile. There are some folks who say it's really great to get a broker force out there to work with mom and pops. We still haven't done that much independent grocery work, because even though 50 people sounds like a lot of that growth for us was in the last couple of years. And, when you have a 15-person team, you just really can't spend the time running down all those small individual accounts. So, you kind of look at it either way. I think opinions vary. I think our opinion is you try to take on anything you can take on yourself, and you find strategic voices and advisors where you can get them. And sometimes those are brokers, and sometimes those are investors, and sometimes those are just like friendly people in the food industry. The folks at Chobani, we went through their incubator program a few years ago, and they have just been like terrific at helping us understand how the industry works and helping us see around corners and not, walk into Walmart and say something really dumb.
Got it. It sounds like it's a very delicate process.
Yeah, it is, but you can mess up a lot, and there's still other retailers who will talk to you. And, ultimately it comes down to, do people love your stuff, and do they buy it, and do they keep buying it? And I think, we've made mistakes and gotten chances, and it's taken us 6 years to build to this point, which feels like a lifetime, but it can be delicate, but I think at risk of, I would err on the side of doing stuff rather than overthinking it.
What mistakes have you made? Give some examples, things you learned for future food entrepreneurs so they can avoid them.
Yeah, we launched mac and cheese because we were like, pasta, we have a great pasta. You know what else is awesome? Mac and cheese. But we did no consumer research. We had no understanding of what people needed in the category. We launched it with like rainbow colored boxes that totally lost this like signature Banza orange that we had. And so for like a year, it just kind of sat there and nobody knew what it was. We had no money to put marketing behind it. It was in very little distribution. So even if we could have spent money against it, like, what were we going to do? Like, do like billboards, do digital ads? Like, that isn't really, necessarily how people do most of their grocery shopping when you're really little. That's not how you find out about new products. So we kind of let it sit for a year. And then we said, we need to go back, better understand the consumer, strengthen the product, and fix the packaging, and kind of say, hey, what is it? What problem are we solving for people? And so you can't let, hey, we can make a good version of this be how you innovate. You need to think about what problem are we solving for people and make sure that you're positioning it that way accordingly, all the way to the packaging and the retailer and the marketing and just, every piece of the puzzle.
It sounds like the customer development side of the world applies to food as well, right?
It does.
That same thinking. Right?
It does. Honestly, the amount of research that we do, I think has been, the more research we do, the better we feel about what we're doing. We did research for a new category last summer, and we were all so convinced it was where we were going to go next. And then the research came back, and the answer was, well, everybody's pretty satisfied with what they're buying there now in that aisle. And we said, okay, well, I guess we shouldn't. And just like thinking about that, because unlike a tech product, you can't just ship it and then be like, and let's see if it works. And then we'll pull it off the production server as soon as it's not a good feature, right? You can't like A/B test quite as cleanly in food. You have to go in when you do something. You have to commit and put your energy and your passion behind launching the right product. And so I think that's been an adjustment for me, coming from slightly more of a tech background, to say, we can't just like try a bunch of stuff. Like, you kind of have to say, hey, let's make sure, that people are excited about this. So we do a lot of sending products to people in their homes and getting home usage tests and finding out how long they cooked it and what they thought of it and what worked and what didn't, and, adapting from there.
Can we drill down to that a little bit? So if I was to start a new food product, and you said the word research, could mean a lot of things, and it's probably different for tech companies and for food companies and for everything else. What would you actually do? Brass tacks, like, what is it? You're mailing the food out, you're standing on a corner. Like, what is the research method for you guys? You hire a firm?
The first thing you're going to do is start with your product and make sure that people like it and that they understand it. And you're going to figure out how you're talking about it too. So that could be literally getting out at a some sort of place where you can get a booth. Now, maybe you're in a local grocery store and you're demoing in that store and you're seeing if the words you say lead somebody to walk away from your thing with it. You're seeing who's willing to buy it. Are people's kids willing to eat it? Like that kind of stuff. And you just always have to start with the food and how does it taste in this industry. We graduated to a lot of surveys, like, a lot of those just simple online surveys to at first kind of friends and family folks. But then we would ask everybody who signed up on our website to buy a box. If, we sent an email around saying, hey, do you want to join our little squad and participate in the occasional research thing that we send? And that helped us get kind of insider feedback. And then, of course, you can use those platforms to reach different, demographic groups or behavioral groups or what have you, to just understand if what you're doing is resonating at all. You're never really going to know until you figure out how you're going to execute it in retail, but that can help you a little bit. And I would caution against using e-commerce, which is the traditional validation platform for people, like all these clothing companies that pop up in your Instagram feeds and all these different products for your home and whatever, like all that stuff. They can do it that way and it can work well that way. Grocery is still primarily an in-person transaction. You go into the store, you look around and you buy stuff. And you can't draw too many conclusions from what sells well online and, versus what sells well in person.
One of the things I've always found as an entrepreneur is if you walk down, the street or maybe through your school or, at a family get together and you tell them about your new business idea, everyone says it's awesome. Even if they're thinking, that's freaking terrible, right? How do you get real candid truth from the customers when you're doing these feedback cycles? So let's say you've got 100,000 customers, 10,000 sign up to be guinea pigs. You send them your new mac and cheese. Do you call everybody? Do you give them an online form? How long is the form? What have you learned about ensuring kind of truth and real signal comes out of the data?
So everything has to be blind. To the best of your ability. And it's hard if you're making something brand new that nobody's ever seen before. We actually used university research partners to do blinded studies for us early on. They have been really pretty great about it. And you can also do that with research. Get different universities around the country can do this kind of thing. And there are also different firms that can do it. And all of them will help you design it in an intelligent way. But even before we did that, honestly, in the aisles of a grocery store, people actually will just tell you kind of what they think, usually very rudely, if they're having a bad day. So you have to have thick skin, especially if it's kind of your baby. And you're, right. you gotta say, hey, it's chill. 100 people liked it and 100 people didn't, and that's fine. So, we found, though, over time, you always have to have a benchmark. What are you comparing to? It's not, do you like this? It's which of these do you like better and which attributes, texture and flavor and, cooking experience and whatever. And what did you think of them? And if you can blind your respondents to what they're testing, then you're going to be able to get interesting results that'll at least tell you something.
Okay. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to make a judgment call.
Yeah,
you get some data and you're going to have to say, good enough. And this is one of the areas where I think a lot of entrepreneurs make a big mistake, right? They get data back that says, not that great on whatever they're working on. And a lot of people they're so vested. They put so much energy. It's their baby, to use your language. They're so committed to it that even though the data is saying run, they keep going forward. They jump in. How do you stay disciplined about really hearing the data?
I think that's a great question. I think one of the things that we've done right, and that I ascribe to, Scott, one of our founders, is he always wanted to rein in new distribution. And I think this is a really healthy way to build a business, is to say, don't just go everywhere and take every sale that you can take. There are certain retailers at certain times that you might not be able to support, or you might not be able to manage effectively, or that you might not have the resources to invest in, or you might not be able to build the awareness to drive the velocity that you want in Publix in the Southeast across 1,100 stores when you've only been in existence for a year and a half. So we said no to as much or more distribution than we said yes to in our early days. And we tried to make sure that we could fully support whatever we went into. And what you have to kind of try to do is say, okay, let's imagine we get this. How is it going to actually sell? How is it going to actually work? And it's the same thing, again, is true in software, where some customers require too much custom work. They're too difficult. They're too big. You're going to have to change your whole like product development pipeline just to suit them. You can't do that. You have to try to stay small early. And I think we just got in the habit early of saying no. And so I think we still have recognized, hey, every single product we launch risks our good name, not just with retailers, of course, with retailers, but really with people at home. If they try Banza stuff and they don't like how it tastes, or like, it just doesn't work for them, then we have lost something. And so early on, we could kind of take more risks at times. We've improved our pasta 3 or 4 times since we launched it. Like we keep, subtly improving what we're doing, our process of making it and what have you. And I think, we had the guts to launch something that wasn't perfect at the beginning, and that was important for just getting out there. But over time, you have to be more and more disciplined about what you do. And again, continue to say no to more things than you say yes to.
That goes against a little bit of conventional startup wisdom. I mean, candidly, the phrase we all use is fuck it, ship it.
Yeah.
Right? You get it out there, you get feedback, you start learning. What's different here, right? Because you're building a product, there's a J curve, right? There's cost, time, and effort. Why not just get a first product out and find everyone hates it? There was a direct-to-consumer food company we looked at investing in, and they took very much a fuck it, ship it mentality. They had a very bad product at the beginning. They got it out. They learned that X%, a small percentage of people liked it. They sent the next one. They were happy to see that doubled. And they were just following the data and accepting failure as part of the process. This feels different, what you're recommending. It feels like you're saying it doesn't have to be perfect, but it's got to be pretty damn good before you hit the channel. Is it just that they were online and they didn't have a channel risk? Or is there some other insight here?
Yeah, it's possible that that's what it was. I think, for us, and again, that might be an appropriate approach. You might be able to say, well, we only reached 1,000 people, and if 700 of them hated it, it doesn't really matter because that's only 700 people that we someday have to win back. That can work. The difference is, and the thing that they might not thought of, is how much time you waste with lead times. Physical products and tech products are just so different. The packaging development, the product development, the finding a co-manufacturer to scale up your initial production, to dial in the settings to get that initial run to be as close to good as you can get it. Every one of those things has time to it. And going from thinking of a new product idea to launching it in the market, the other thing is retailers will only take new products, on average in a category about once a year. For super fast moving snack categories or beverages, more like every 6 months. But that means that you only have so many shots. And typically speaking, from thinking of a product to getting it on shelf is going to be about a year. Now you can do it a little bit faster, especially if you're not trying to get it on shelf early. But investing all that time and energy, when you could just spend a little bit more time in the kitchen, just spend a little bit more time in the kitchen. Don't give people food that they don't think tastes good, because that just isn't going to work. And if you think you can do it, now what I will say, you don't need to please everybody right off the bat. Our product was better suited for people who already had to be gluten-free right away. So we focused on that audience because we knew, let's be honest, the standards for gluten-free pasta were a little bit lower than the standards for regular pasta. Okay. So we targeted that group when we knew our product still had some growing to do. Over time, as we've improved it, we don't really focus, we know lots of people who don't eat gluten eat our pasta, but we're able to focus on a larger, broader market because we've continued making significant improvements.
You said something really interesting before. You said you were saying no to distribution offers if you didn't have the resources to give them sufficient support. What's the playbook for a food founder for giving sufficient support? What is that?
So the first thing you have to think about is working capital. And that is not a fun podcast topic, so we're not going to go deep on it. But can you afford the supply chain impact of sourcing a bunch? So when you first get an order from a retailer, there's an initial fill. That fill might be very large. And they might get it for free from you if you're, paying slotting or something like that. So maybe you get paid, but in order to do that, you have to invest a bunch in resources, in the raw materials and the production, and then getting it to stores, and then you get paid whatever 30, 60 days later.
Right.
That takes a long time. And when you're small, that ties up a lot of money. And you may not have enough money to do that. Now, that's not a great reason not to say yes to something if you think it's going to be good. But let's think about that when you think about how much stuff you're launching at once. You need to think about that when you fundraise also. The other is marketing support. They expect you to invest in a certain amount of trade funds, which is like discounting or ad fees or things like that, to help people find the product in store. If you can't do that, if you're not going to ever be able to get sale tags up on your product and deal with the complicated set of accounting issues that come with that in the food world, it's very manual and there's a lot of issues. Chargebacks is the phrase that we use. There's a lot of places where you can lose money that you didn't expect to. You need to make sure your unit level economics are good when you do that. And then lastly, it's that sort of, and the most important piece here is the shopper, the person at home, the consumer. Are you going to be able to reach them and convince them to come into a grocery store that has 40 to 60,000 products on its shelves and pick yours off the shelf when there are so many brands competing for their attention and investing money in social and in shopper marketing applications and stuff like that? So all those things, it's just to say, make sure that you're going to be able to invest in the in-store marketing you need to do, in the out-of-store social media brand building that you're going to need to do, and in working with, the retailer in your own supply chain.
What's the budget to launch something? Is there a rule of thumb like X dollars per store, X dollars per box? Like how does a new entrepreneur figure out what is sufficient?
You figure out your payback period. The industry standard is 6 months, but we would prefer for it to be much faster than that. Where you say, okay, where it's going to take us about 6 months to break even on this thing. Sometimes big food companies say more like a year or even longer. We prefer to be quicker because, again, we don't have the resources. So we prefer to pay back in 3 months. But, if you're in the 3 to 6 month range and you're actually right about it, because early on you're going to be wrong, you're going to assume a lot more sales than you get. If you're actually right about that number, once you learn the pattern through trial and error, through burning a little bit of extra capital, then you'll kind of figure it out and you'll understand your cadence. Again,
okay, that's
don't
the
say no to a good
side.
Opportunity. Yeah, that's the working capital side and the marketing.
But tell me
side.
about the marketing. What do you need?
Both.
What's the budget for marketing? How much money do you need
Well,
to support a launch? How do you think about it? What's a metric? Is it X dollars per location? How do you think about it?
You could give a number and say, look, a retailer would want you to spend about 15% of your sales on trade spend, and you could call that the number. But early on, we certainly couldn't do that. We didn't have the money. And most of our marketing was social media. And it was directly targeting specific consumers leveraging influencers and user-generated content. I call them influencers. Some of these people, we would have people who had like 500 or 1,000 followers, and we're like, hey, you make good stuff. Why don't you make some stuff with our pasta? And that was a way for us to really build, trial and loyalty and love for what we were doing without having to spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars on big marketing programs. So stuff like that works too. But, you could call it 15% in trade spend is what you would expect to spend. And, you probably wouldn't be terribly far off.
So you've been in the startup game for as long as I've known you, one form or another. We're shifting gears here a little bit.
Sure.
And the whole world, is, at least in the States, is reimagining food right now. Right? This is a big macro trend. You guys are an important part of it. There are traditional tech VCs out there, and that's a lot of where you have tech and life science risk capital deployed into the system. Have been focusing a little bit on the space, but it's a tweener in terms of fit for the firm's strategies. How do you raise money as a food entrepreneur today? Because it seems to me there's not a ton, at least that I'm aware of infrastructure and capital sources. And you guys have been successful. You raised a ton of dough, as we said earlier in the show, about close to 30 million. How do people navigate this? Where do you go? Where do you look? How do you find it?
Yeah. I think we've actually, I think we've started to see food companies raising a lot more and treating themselves as if they are tech companies. And I think there's some danger in that because if you can't provide, just to what you were saying, if you can't provide the returns that a venture investor is looking for and they're wading into an unfamiliar space, they're going to push you into things that aren't necessarily the right thing for your business. We've focused on having investors who understand food and consumer packaged goods, fashion and beauty and things like that as well. And they, we do have sector specific, CPG investors. And so they understand, here's how much money we're putting in, here's our expected return. And they're willing to get in for the long haul and say, let's build this thing and see how far it can go. There are plenty of people who would have given us much more money at even a much higher valuation than we took. But if you do that, you're going to mess up your incentive structure. And everything at a startup is incentives. It's not about maximizing. It's about managing the right alignment because you're building something. We're 6 years in and we have years and years to go. We're going to keep growing 50% plus year over year for years to come. So we need to be building for the long term. We can't have somebody who says, but you didn't grow 100x because that's not how food companies work. They don't grow 100x. Certainly not in a couple year timeline, the way that software can. So if you have people, giving you outsized valuations who don't understand the way that you're going to build your business, who push you into doing risky things, you could end up with several $100 million in capital and not the sales to back it up. We think that there are some food companies that can build that way, and there are a few that sort of prominently have, but there are a whole lot more that are raising mega rounds right now that probably shouldn't be. And we've been waiting until we had the sales to say now's the right time to raise money because we are confident that we've de-risked the next 3 years, 4 years of our plan. And that's the plan that we take to investors. And we say, here, we're going to build up. And this is probably a little bit more of what you wanted me to say is the actual answer is look at your unit per SKU per store per week. So how many boxes of penne pasta am I selling per store per week? Figure out how much growth I need in the number of points of distribution and in that base velocity in order to reach my sales targets. Figure out if that's reasonable based on the universe of potential retail partners, on my product development pipeline, on trends that I've seen when I added new SKUs, and make sure that you can build bottoms up to your revenue targets. And if you can do that, and then you have your story, and then you have your consumer love, then you've got a pretty strong case for, hey, we're going to grow 50 to 100% every year.
What I'm hearing from you is that the normal laws of startup physics apply in this sector. There are two ways of doing that. One of raising. One is, raising at valuations that you can grow into, and the fundamentals match the game. And then there's hype games for companies that get a lot of attention, a lot of excitement from the investor community. They get valuations that are unreasonable, to use a subtle word for how I feel about it. And they get totally crazy. And you can win in both games. I used to think poorly of the hype game, but if you can keep playing that game as a founder, you can do very well. I'm sure there's other founders out there that know they're not going to grow into these valuations, but as long as they can trade again or do a secondary, they win.
Yeah.
They win.
Yeah.
It's a game of hot potato.
Well, and the thing is, the goal is to accomplish your mission, right? Like the goal is to build a company that lasts, and food companies are around for decades. If you do this thing right, you've got decades. You can keep innovating. You can keep making stuff that people love, that their kids will eat, that they'll then feed their kids. And the successes in this space, some of them went a really long time. Like Annie's or Oatly were around for 15 or 20 years before they really heavily capitalized or exited or whatever. And I think that, and that patience has paid off because those companies can have, revenue and upside. And I think that, and those two are very different. They're different examples of something similar, but you don't squander the opportunity to go big and tell a crazy big story at any point. You just have more of a track record to do it off of. It's just about whether you're trying to do this to, play it like a tech company or play it with that sort of hype cycle game, and whether you want to be in this for the long term or not. And I think for us, if we felt like there was a super scintillating story that would promise 100x returns to investors, we would be out there telling that. Now, we're still more aggressive than a lot of companies in the space. We're not talking about a couple X multiple of our revenue or something like that. There are plenty of companies that work in sort of more commoditized spaces like that, but there's definitely a middle ground of really great high growth brands that are, fulfilling their mission and making their investors happy. And I think investors should look for those. They don't need to invest in something that's telling you that it's $1 billion pre when it's got $20 million in sales.
Well, maybe tip your hand here a little bit and tell the world how VCs, investors, and entrepreneurs should be thinking about the future of food. How is this whole space going to evolve? Where do you think opportunities exist for folks?
So I think, the thing that has been most interesting and promising is, over the last 20 years, we've seen about, something approaching 1% a year, really over the last 10 years, accelerating, something approaching 1% a year of market share shifting from big food companies to emerging brands. And that suggests that there is a consumer shift that's happening that's driving that. And we think we've seen that. Now, there can be a hype cycle, and I'll get to some of the watchouts in a second. But if you really pay attention to what particularly young people, we focused heavily on millennials and Gen Z at Banza, not just because we are those things, but that's who the consumers of the future are. What choices are they making? What choices do they want for their children? Those are the consumers of the future. The amount of dollars that they're going to be spending in food is going to increase dramatically. So what are their values? Can you create something that's values aligned with what their actual problems are, what their actual needs are? So we think the reason that what we're doing works, and the companies that we really admire what they're doing works, the reason is they're thinking about what products will create value for people. The history of the industry is what products will sell. So the problem that you see in food is there are basically, at any given time, there are two divergent ways of thinking about it, which is to that point about balance and what we struggle with. Everybody struggles to make the right choices. They want to believe they're doing something healthy, but they want something tasty, right? If we can deliver something that actually is healthy over the long term, we're going to win. That's where the real opportunity is. If you see a trend and you just launch a fast follower product, suddenly there's a dozen companies in the category, everybody's trying to grab a new piece. Sometimes big food companies innovate this way also. It's just going to be a mess. And there's not a long-term value creation opportunity there. So we say, focus on the younger consumers, focus on what their values are, which is going to be, sustainability and health alongside taste. And, don't be afraid to build, slightly slower, which is to say, 100% a year instead of trying to build 500 or 1,000% a year.
Right. What does the industry need? So you've got market segments to target.
Yeah.
What do, as an entrepreneur, what tools are you wishing existed, services existed, that you hope someone listening to this will go and build?
There's been a proliferation of technology companies that are providing services to food and CPG companies. I just think we need more talent to keep coming into this space. The key to building any company is talent. I think people who want to create real change in the world should recognize that there's an opportunity to have a huge impact on the environment where, 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions are tied to the food industry. We now think, there's a huge opportunity to make an impact on human health and healthcare because food is the most important component to that. We want people to keep coming in and doing this, whether they're joining companies or starting companies. The industry is expanding. And that's my point about all the market share being stolen, right? Like the industry is expanding. There are more companies than ever. There are more good small companies than ever. Don't just go join the big ones, but view this as an opportunity to really change things. And make sure that you're finding those companies that, again, are trying to actually create value for people as opposed to just saying, boy, I bet I can sell a lot of these. And I think that's the thing that we hope people do.
It seems to me that there's a need for impact in the food world beyond the commercial side. I remember, I don't know if I got this right, but I'm pretty sure I do, that the government has designated pizza as a vegetable.
Yeah.
Right? Crazy things have gotten through legislation. What needs to change, if anything, if you were king? how would you rewrite law to help the public get healthy, good food options?
I mean, that's a very complicated question, but you're absolutely right that it needs attention. Another fun anecdote for people: in order for a product to be considered a protein in schools, you have to literally put another animal protein on it. So if we wanted to serve Banza as a protein pasta for maybe, in order to replace an animal-based protein, they would have to put a meat sauce or a cheese on it in K through 12.
Wow.
That's just like an impossible disaster for us to try to change the way that people eat. So that's how strong your lobbies are in meat and in sugar and in dairy. I think, there are documentaries that have covered this ground very, very well. Sometimes they can
Could you recommend
scary. They're gonna slip my mind now that we're live on this thing.
Like ones like What the Health, Forks Over Knives. So those other ones that grab you. We'll link to them in the show notes for folks.
Yeah, I need to go back.
It's okay. You can do it after the show.
Schools that I can't remember the name of right now. That was the one that just got me, and I was like, oh man, soda companies are just up there making sure that they've got fountains in schools and stuff like that, and that they're taking out cooking equipment and the potatoes and vegetable and like all this sort of stuff. There's definitely a huge policy component to it, but really there's an innovation component to it too, because you can't just legislate your way out of problems. You have to make sure that there are, well-built solutions that will make people happy to eat healthier products. If you don't do that, you're not going to, you can't solve structural problems purely with legislation. You really need, and I think we've seen this in tech and in medicine over the last year, you need the private sector to step up and have people innovate in ways that are values aligned. And, I think that's the future of the industry.
It seems like they're stifling some innovation with some of these requirements, right? Like having to put meat on a vegetable protein to call it a protein.
Yeah, and companies are working on this, but it's crazy, and same on the agriculture and sustainability side. And there's a lot of stuff.
Is there a coalition for the smaller group of companies out there to do lobbying? Have you guys tried to counteract some of the corrupt behavior?
This will be the first conversation I've had where the concept of lobbying even entered the equation. I think, for us, we still viewed ourselves as too small, but it's a good idea. And I'm sure some of the plant-based meat companies are out there doing it because it's very important for what they want to accomplish as well.
And if you're right that they're taking 1% market share a year, eventually they're going to have spending power in aggregate, even if it's fragmented. So. Yeah.
I think we may already. I think you're right that working together is part of the future.
Cool. I want to switch gears to one more topic before we cut for today. So I know you landed in Banza via your experience at Venture for America. For those listening, you were in the senior management of Venture for America. Can you tell us a little bit about the program?
Yeah. So Venture for America has grown and changed a little bit. What we've been trying to do is send young people to careers in startups and entrepreneurship in cities that have relatively fewer startups and entrepreneurs, rather than just sending people to New York, Silicon Valley, into tech companies or consulting firms or law firms or banks or other sort of Fortune 500 companies. We're saying, hey, go smaller, go earlier. Go to cities like Detroit, New Orleans, Providence, Cincinnati. Those are some of our first cities. And that's a great proving ground for a young person to learn how to operate a company, potentially become an entrepreneur themselves. So far, VFA is up to about 200 kids per class, comparable with the size of a business school. And since inception in 2012, there have been about 200 companies started by VFA alumni, including the likes of Banza. And it's been really fun and exciting to see that network and community build, and sort of be an alternative professional path that's a little bit more brightly lit. And lately, I've really admired how the organization has taken more of a focus on underrepresented groups getting into entrepreneurship, and they've been more successful there in recent years as well.
How has the group performed? And And I'll say I used to be on one of the litany of boards for Venture for America, the Entrepreneur Board. How is the organization performed in achieving the mission?
I think what we've been able to do is to create, you could say, the equivalent of a Harvard Business School for entrepreneurs, except we did it without charging you hundreds of thousands of dollars. You don't have to pay to do this program. You actually get paid by a company. We've been able to help, hundreds of startups around the country build and grow by getting access to talent, that really wants to work hard and is willing to move there, that wasn't going to move to Detroit or New Orleans otherwise. And again, going on to start a couple hundred companies that have collectively raised hundreds of millions of dollars is and some of them have exited, although we're very early in the life cycle of most of these businesses. That's we think it's off to a roaring start, and we think that there can't be too many programs that contribute to building a stronger innovation ecosystem in this country and that take all kinds of different approaches to do it. And I think, VFA has definitely found its place as one of those programs.
That's awesome. Yeah, you guys were, there was another dimension in terms of mission, which was to help reinvigorate those cities. What did you guys learn through the process about what it takes to kind of breathe life into communities around with regard to innovation?
Yeah, I think one thing is the country is probably in a better position economically than it was in 2011 when we started this, and we were recovering from a really brutal recession. So the macroeconomic trends have favored that. I also think that innovation and startups are just way more in vogue than they were at some level back then. I think that this last year has proven that you can have a distributed team. You can build a great company from anywhere. We're having this conversation virtually. That's the new normal for how you can build companies. And these are really super cool, but lower cost of living cities, where all of a sudden you're seeing more investment dollars going in those directions. You're seeing good companies come out of different places. And I think there are still just a couple of really credible startup super hubs in the country, but there are a lot of smaller communities that have grown, over the last 8 or 10 years.
Awesome. Thank you for all of that. Last question for you. What's the most important thing you've learned as an entrepreneur? A little bit of wisdom you could leave for the audience.
I think, I guess for me, the most important thing I've learned building companies, because I don't know if I would call myself an entrepreneur, building companies is that it's all about the people in the team. And there's a couple of good reasons for that. I have a rule that I call the first 10 rule, which is whenever I make a hire, I want to make sure that it's someone that I would have hired in the first 10 people of the company. And that's because so many things will change over the course of your time that you need people who are adaptable and who have that figure it out mindset. Also, those are the people who are motivated and nonlinear aspirational thinkers, and they're going to continue to be that as you grow. And, that makes the company more able to take on new challenges and grow and succeed when you change what you're doing. And if you surround yourself with those people, the key to continuing to work on startups and growth stage businesses is to be hyper motivated every day. And you're going to be most motivated when you're working with a group of people who impress you. And I think, my happiness at VFA and then at Banza has been driven by building an organization that's just chock full of people who we would have loved to have had in our first 10. And I think if you can build your team that way for as long as humanly possible, you will end up with a really exciting organization that'll always rise to meet new challenges.
This has been super insightful. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Mark. Great catching up with you.
Well, that was super informative. Mike really knows his game. Separately, I can't wait to try out the chickpea pizza. If you like what you heard, please hook us up with a like or a 5-star review, and feel free to share with a friend. You can find me on Twitter @MPD. To hear more of my conversations with innovators, subscribe on YouTube, Facebook, or any major podcast platform. Just search for Innovation with Mark Peter Davis.